Hey guys, John Lee Dumas here, founder and host of EO Fire, and you're listening to Bravepreneur Parents Academy with Balaji O.
Welcome to Bravepreneur Parents Academy, where the world's most inspiring entrepreneurs reveal their most defining childhood moments and share their legacy for raising brave little heroes who will grow up to change the world. And now, he still reads comic books under the blanket at bedtime. Please welcome your host, best-selling author, award-winning speaker, and self-confessed geek dad, Balaji O. You know, like the hotel in Vegas? Yeah, no, that's really his name. Balaji O.
Okay, folks, she's a registered clinical counselor. She's put in 9,500 clinical hours working with children, teens, and families. I mean, when you put in 9,500 hours, it's not a job anymore, okay? It's a calling. It's a mission. Parenting, yep, she got it. Discipline, yep. Sibling rivalry, check. Childhood anxiety, check. Social skill difficulties, low self-esteem, defiance, come on! This young lady is about to give us the business here. She's got two beautiful kids, ages 12 and 10. She hails all the way from Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. Please help me welcome, put your hands together for Miss Sharon Selby. Welcome, Sharon.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction.
I am excited to have you here. I'm fired up. Sharon, you have expertise in a lot of areas that we parents are just we're expected to be good at these things. And nobody really teaches parents how to do this stuff. How in the world did you build 9,500 hours of expertise in these areas?
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. I think, as you say, it has felt like a calling. I've always loved working with children and supporting kids. And even as a teenager, I was always volunteering in group homes and just wherever I could hang out with kids. And then I went on to be an elementary school teacher. And I just couldn't meet all the needs of all the children in the classroom. And so I decided I wanted to become more specialized and go back to school, do my master's in counseling psychology. And 17 years later, I've been counseling and loving it. And it's a very, sometimes challenging job, but also very rewarding. I've worked as a school counselor and then also as a private practice counselor.
Wow, phenomenal. Okay, folks, I need you guys to lean in because we don't get this sort of opportunity every day. Sharon, I've had the opportunity to go through some of your work online. You are prolific in creating content that helps families, young children, parents, and we're gonna do our best in this half hour to get the most we can out of you, Sharon. Okay, so Sharon, today one of the topics that I'd love for you to kind of go into is the topic of anxiety. Mm-hmm. The topic of anxiety. So according to what you've been able to share, kids, people in general, but kids in particular, are experiencing more and more anxiety, perhaps in this generation, than in previous generations. What's going on, Sharon?
Yeah, that is such a big question and something, many theorists are always debating. I think there's a combination of factors that's going on. I think we're in a real shift with parenting styles. And so we're the first generation of parents where the majority of discipline, fortunately, people are not using physical punishment. At least I hope not. The research is showing how that really negatively impacts children long term. So, what to do instead is difficult because parents get a little bit lost. They know, okay, I shouldn't be hitting my kids, but how do I put those limits in place? And so that creates anxiety for the parents. It also makes it harder to set boundaries sometimes, and children do need boundaries to feel more secure. Yeah. We're also, I believe, breeding more sensitive children because we know that very often sensitive partners find sensitive partners, and that's a natural kind of fit. And then genetically, we are breeding children who are more sensitive, and children who are more sensitive are likely to be more anxious. Then we're living in a world where we don't feel as trusting to be able to go out, let them just play on the streets all day long. Some neighborhoods you can, but a lot you can't. Having children walk to school isn't always as possible as it was before. And then we have parents who, out of great love for their children, are overprotecting their children. And so it can be distressing when you see your child having painful emotions and feeling uncomfortable about things. And so as a parent, it's natural to want to jump in and rescue them and try and make everything happy and everything better. But if we don't let our kids experience distress, then they're never going to learn how to handle it. And so then that causes anxiety for them as well. So, there's lots of reasons that we could hypothesize about why anxiety is on the rise. But what we know for sure is that it is on the rise, and we need to watch out for it, because when we can treat it, it's very treatable, and we can teach anxiety management strategies. But if it's left untreated, it can turn into depression.
Interesting. Sharon, help me make that connection with depression a little bit clearer. Mm-hmm. Those of us who are grown-ups, we understand what depression looks like. We perhaps have relatives or friends or know of folks just in the community who've suffered from depression. I wasn't really aware that there was any sort of line connecting anxiety or being overly cautious to depression. So help me understand how that could happen.
Sure. And I want to point out, of course, it doesn't mean for sure that if you have a child that's got high anxiety that they're going to be depressed. It's just something that we watch out for, because they can go hand in hand. So what tends to happen is usually the anxiety shows up first. And if the anxiety isn't recognized or able to be managed, then it starts to spin. And so anxiety is really about the future. It's all those what if questions and thinking of the worst case scenario that can happen in the future. And then you can imagine as you become a teenager, you get insecure anyways just because of that age and stage of development. But if you also are more anxious on top of that, then you start to feel incapable and you start to feel quite helpless and hopeless, because now you have such big fears. Perhaps it's social anxiety and about meeting new people or going out with a group or trying new activities. And so it starts to kind of paralyze you. And so then you start to think about the past, and then you start to think about things that you see as failures, and then you start to get down on yourself. And depression is really about when you start ruminating in the past. And then it starts to be hard to have that motivation to go out there and try to, find positive situations or have positive experiences. And so you get caught in this cycle that can be very, very challenging to deal with.
Wow. Interesting. Okay, so Sharon, I have young kids just like yourself. My sons are 8 and 5. I know your kids are 12 and 10. And you've given some really vivid examples, such as not being able to let your kids go out and wander the neighborhood as perhaps we could when we were children. That's one area in which parents, yes, were more protective than our parents were, but perhaps it might be a little bit by necessity. Let's work on that example first and foremost. Should we be allowing our kids to kind of go out and wander a little further and explore and become more autonomous? How cautious should we be? Where do we draw the line?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, of course, it's neighborhood specific, but something probably that we can all do is, for example, even going out for a hike, going out into the woods. It's interesting. I actually saw a speaker who talked about how playgrounds have become overly safe because everything is so evenly measured that the ladders, there's not really, you don't have to think even when you're on the playground. And so this particular person who's actually based in England is trying to make playgrounds become more adventurous again, so that there's actually opportunity for some more risky play, as he called it. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Because he was also saying, if you're walking on the sidewalk everywhere, you don't have to think. You're just putting your feet in front of you. The ground's really even. And there's just not much going on with, your critical thinking skills. If you go out into the woods and you can, be with your kids hiking, but you're letting them kind of run off ahead of you and to the side, and they're climbing a bit, and there's roots to navigate, and there's maybe, some big rocks you've got to get over, then, your child's getting that feeling of being a little bit more adventurous. And so a parent who's willing to do that and isn't calling out, watch out and be careful all the time is letting their child have those experiences that we had as kids when we were out for the whole day and our parents didn't know where we were. Yeah. But we were having to problem solve and we were having to, find solutions. So even on a good old family hike, crossing over a creek or something like that, letting kids find their own way and not always being the parents that are teaching. We tend to do that a lot. We tend to be always teaching, and we sometimes need to let kids figure stuff out on their own.
Wow. Okay. I like that. It actually brings to mind an incident just from a couple of days ago. I was at a playground with my two kids. I was pushing my 5-year-old on the swing, and my 8-year-old decided to climb a little step wall that was behind the swings. And it started off pretty low, probably 3 feet high, but went up to about maybe 10 feet high. Mm-hmm. And so he got onto the 3-foot ledge and he jumped off, no problem. Then he got onto the 4-foot ledge and looked over at me. Mm. And at that point, he anticipated I was going to say, get down from there. That's not safe. Mm-hmm. But what I told him was, when you're jumping from a high point, you need to bend your knees to absorb the impact. Mm-hmm. And he said, really? I said, yeah. And I kind of demonstrated. So he said, can I try that? I said, if you want. Mm-hmm. And so he went for it and he did it and he was fine. And then he climbed up to the 5-foot ledge and he looked at me again and I ignored him. Mm-hmm. And he was like, can I jump from here? I was like, if you think you can do it safely. And so he kind of tested his boundaries a little bit, which I wanted him to do. Uh-huh. And he tried the levels from which he felt it was safe. He didn't go all the way to 10 feet. No. But I think perhaps that might have been an example of risky play. It wasn't overly risky, mm-hmm. but it allowed him to test his boundaries, to learn how to do it safely, and to just kind of, be a kid.
Exactly. And I think if we can use, that great story as an image and as a theme, that's what our, role is as parents, is we want to give our children the tools they need so that when they do go off on their own and they're adults, that they've got some ways to problem solve and to be able to look at things critically. So, and that's important even in those teenage years too. We don't want them just doing things that their friends are doing just because. We want them to look at the risks and we want them to weigh it up. So we have to start that with our children when they're young, where we're trying to give them some choices where they have to make some decisions, obviously around things that, are safe. But, we want to empower them.
I love it. So, Sharon, one thing I'm trying to figure out is even kids that grow up in the same family, it's just amazing how this happens. Mm-hmm. But you can have two kids and each kid has a totally different personality. Yeah. Totally different demeanor when it comes to risk taking, totally different demeanor when it comes to relationships and just across the board. And that can be a challenge for us parents because with the first child, we take the first few years to figure out what the heck we're doing. We finally think we've got it worked out, Sharon. And then the next kid comes along and the kid is totally different.
And we're humbled again.
Yes. And we have to throw the playbook out of the door. So, Sharon, what happens if we have one child that maybe is more sensitive or more anxious than the other child? How do we parent the two children?
Well, I think your framework, is still going to be the same. Like, we want our children to feel rooted. So that means that they have this, strong feeling of connection to us. That's, to me, the biggest piece in everything we do as parents is the relationship. And from a strong relationship, then we have influence to be able to guide them in other areas of their life. And then the other area is helping them learn to be respectful and us being respectful towards them. And so what I mean by that is, especially with feelings, being able to create a home where their feelings are validated. And this is a shift from previous generations. We've come a long way. I mean, at one point, there used to be the phrase, children should be seen and not heard. Yep. And then, I believe our generation, was more heard. But still, there are many examples of people from our generation where, it wasn't acceptable to express your opinion to your parents. That's right. You might be sent to your room for doing so because that was seen as being rude. And it could be, if you were crying, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Negative emotions weren't really allowed. And so we've come a long way in recognizing like all our emotions are important. And the fabulous movie Inside Out has, also illustrated that. So I think where parents get confused too is not all behaviors are okay, but definitely all emotions are okay. And we really want our children to express their emotions with us because that's how they're going to learn how to handle those big waves of emotion that can feel overwhelming at times. So, it might look different for a child who's more sensitive because they may need a lot more time to talk about their emotions and they're going to absorb everything from the environment because children who are highly sensitive, they act like an emotional barometer for the room. So even if a teacher raises their voice in the classroom at a child, it may not be at your child, but your child could come home quite stressed out because the teacher was, really upset with another child in the class. So it's as though a highly sensitive child absorbs everything through the pores of their body. So they feel everything and they read other people's moods and they feel that as well. So with a highly sensitive child, you have to be on your toes as a parent. You have to really be watching, yourself, because every tone, every gesture, it all means something to that child. And then we have to really be there to support them with our child's emotions.
Okay. All right, Sharon. So I'm going to be transparent with you here. All right. I want to share a personal experience that I had with my older son. And I think this might be helpful to some of us dads in particular. Okay. This is not my best moment, just 100% honesty. Okay. It's not my best moment. All right. So I had the opportunity to coach my son last year when he was 7 in soccer. This is my first time coaching. I've always enjoyed working with kids. That's actually my passion as well. So I'm very good with kids and I love working with my son. Amazing opportunity. And I look forward to coaching my younger son as well. But there was this one particular instance. You've got to imagine that being the coach's son can't always be easy because the expectation is going to be higher. Not even necessarily expectation from other parents, but expectation from the coach, from your dad. Dad expects you to be on your P's and Q's. You've got to toe the line. And I have always had high expectations for my kids. My wife and I do. Not high expectations in terms of achievement, as in you don't have to be the best player, but you always have to work hard. You always have to try hard. You always have to be respectful, have the right attitude. Those sort of things are really important to us. And so it's possible that my child is sensitive. I was a sensitive child. So when you talked about sensitive parents having sensitive kids, I was like, oh, okay. So in this particular instance, I've noticed that my son has a fantastic attitude, very good sportsmanship, always looks out for other people. If they fall down, he'll stop the game and help them up. And I've even taught him how to lose, right? So if he loses, you keep your head high, you shake hands, you say congratulations, good game to the next team. And that took a few months to get to, but we got there. So that was a big win. But let me tell you about his trigger, Sharon. His trigger is injustice. If he feels like he's been treated unfairly, it's on. It's on. And so in this particular instance, we didn't have enough kids to play two sides of a team, so I joined the team opposing my son. Okay. Well, I'm a grown-up playing against kids, and so no, actually I was on my son's team. And so what I was doing was I was taking it easy on the kids. That allowed the other team to score several goals in a row, and my son was livid. He was upset. And so at a certain point, I told him like, hey, look, you need to chill out. You need to be cool. All right? I'm playing against kids here. I can't go all out. And that's when, I saw the change in his face. His face fell, shoulders fell, the eyes started to well up. And I told him, boy, you will not start crying on this field. Well, of course, what did he do?
Yeah, burst into tears.
Yes, he burst into tears. And so, at that point, I'm feeling self-conscious. I'm the coach. It's not like I was mean to him. I just told him, hey, I'm just trying to make things work on the soccer field. So he's crying. And so long story short, eventually we patched it up and figured things out. But I think that a lot of us dads, we want to toughen particularly our sons. This is like a dad-son dynamic. We want to toughen our sons up, Sharon, and we feel like to do that, we have to help them experience adversity. That's probably not too far from the being accurate. I think that maybe where we get it wrong, Sharon, is where we become, or when we become the adversity as dad. When dad is the adversity, I feel like, at least from my experience, somehow the lesson tends to get lost.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of my child learning to overcome adversity, my child just gets upset at dad. All right. Talk me through this, Sharon.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example. And, it's good of you to share that, right? Because it's hard to share those moments. But we are all human. And so I would agree with you. I think what's most important, as I said earlier, is the relationship with your child. And so in that moment, your son was feeling like this was all completely unfair, and he was getting more and more angry. So I have a little saying, which is, when your child's in a state, validate, validate, validate. Because rhymes tend to stick in our brains better. And so, and sometimes we overcomplicate parenting. Like, if we stuck to that little rhyme, it would help us out in so many situations. Because when we're validating, it doesn't actually mean we're agreeing with them, but it tells your child, I hear you, I'm listening to you, and I understand your concerns and your perspective. Because if we try and move into the logical problem-solving piece right away, their brain can't move there. When you're in an emotional state, you are unable to really problem solve at that moment. And that's for adults, even with a fully developed brain. So for children who their logical part of their brain is really only developing between ages 5 and 7, and it's in the early stages. So when they are in a heightened state of emotion, there's no chance they're going to hear anything that's rational. So if we can remember, the other little saying I have is feelings first, logics last. And so at that moment to just say, hey, buddy, I know this is, you're really upset. This doesn't seem fair at all. Just, trust me on this one. I hear how you're feeling. I get it. and just try to show him that you're still aligned with him.
Yeah.
Because I think it would have felt to him like, you had completely become like almost opposite ends, even though you were on the same team.
Yeah. That's helpful. That is really helpful, actually.
Yeah, it's such, we're such a society of problem solvers, which is great, right? But there's a time and place for problem solving. And this also comes from previous generations of parenting who believed, discipline had to be done in that very moment. And you had to give your child a talking to in that very moment. And actually what we now know is, well, the brain's not absorbing any of those messages. So until your brain gets calm, you can't have your child reflect. So just stick with the feelings, and that will help their brain become more calm. And then it's going to be useful to talk to them and have them reflect and actually learn something from the experience. But you can do that later.
That I did not know. Okay, so let me get back to the point in terms of what I was illustrating. One of the things I try to illustrate in the story, which is that parents, and often dads and their sons in particular, but parents in general, we want our kids to be emotionally resilient.
Right.
We want them, we know we can't protect them from everything. We can't bubble wrap them and send them out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that they're going to get hurt. They're going to run against hurtful people and hurtful situations. And we just want them to be strong, so that they don't get broken. Even if they get hurt, they don't get broken. Yeah. What are the right ways to start to cultivate emotional resilience in our kids?
Well, so it's interesting because it feels a little bit counterintuitive. You think, okay, well, if I just tell my child to toughen up, tell them, that's nothing to cry about, well, then that'll toughen them up. But actually, that's not really going to work because, again, you're taking away from the strength of your relationship. They don't feel heard. They feel bitter. And so they're not learning anything through that style. So what you want to do, as I said, is really validate their emotions, but how we build up their resilience is by not overprotecting them. And so, sometimes, especially with a more anxious child, they feel nervous often to try new things or to go to a birthday party. They've never been to that house before. And so quite often for parents, it's easier to just avoid those things because then your child's not distressed. And everyone can just carry on and, it's less stressful for everybody. But with a child who is more anxious, you don't want to overdo it, but you want to give them little doses of being exposed to something that's just a little bit out of their comfort zone. And if you have a goal in mind, such as swimming lessons, and they're really scared of going in the pool, then you have to think, okay, how are we going to get there? Like throwing the kid in the pool, that could be one approach that fits with the kind of like just toughen my child up.
That's how my dad learned, by the way.
Okay, yeah. And you hear those stories. And
almost drowned.
Maybe it works. Yeah, maybe. I'm glad your dad didn't drown. But there's other ways to do it, which feel much more respectful to the child and which preserve your relationship much better. So you'd want to kind of, think of it as scaffolding. You're going to put some supports in place so that you create those baby steps so that in the end, they can join those big group swimming lessons. But maybe at first it's going to take you going swimming with them a bunch till they get more comfortable in the water. Maybe then you build up and you do a few private lessons so that they get used to swimming with somebody else. And, then you move to the group lessons, but you're kind of near the side of the pool so they know you're close by. Then you can move to the viewing area. And so you're doing it in steps, and we call that exposure therapy. And we use that for anything, when a child, it's like a desensitization process. So the way to build resilience is to help kids learn how to problem solve, to learn that no problem's so big it can't be solved, but we want to coach them as to how to get there.
Yeah.
But we're not going to rescue them from never having to deal with problems or face problems.
I love that. And I love how you give both ends of the spectrum. Some of us parents try to shield our children from those uncomfortable situations.
Mm-hmm.
Others of us still use the old school approach, which is just throw them in the deep end, either literally with swimming lessons
Right.
or, in a myriad of other situations.
Mm-hmm.
We tend to throw them in the deep end
Mm-hmm.
and, hope they'll figure it out. It sounds like what you're saying is don't necessarily throw them in the deep end and be like, all right, I'll be back in an hour.
Right.
Build the scaffolding, start small.
Yeah, because it's all about trust. And if your child trusts you, like imagine what that looks like as a teenager. Those are the teenagers that are going to call you up at midnight from a party and go, "Hey, Dad, I'm really uncomfortable at this party. Everybody's drunk or doing drugs, and I just want to get out of here. Can you come get me?" Like that's what we're aiming for in the teenage years. We want our kids to be able to know they can count on us.
That's a really, really powerful point. A lot of us parents are sort of stuck in certain patterns. I guess as human beings, we all have habits.
Mm-hmm.
And as parents, we have habits. Some of us like the way our parents parented,
Mm-hmm.
and we try to sort of mimic those parenting skills
Mm-hmm.
and practices. Others of us maybe didn't like some of the things our parents did, and we try to do the opposite. But one way or another, it feels like, I may be wrong, it feels like as parents, we maybe don't spend as much time as we could learning the actual best practices. We kind of adopt, okay, this is the way I think parenting should work, and then for the next 18 years, we go with that approach. But you talking about that trust, for those of us who maybe use a more old school technique where it's sink or swim,
Mm-hmm.
it's extreme exposure therapy,
Mm-hmm.
maybe in the moment, your child goes through the behavior you want them to go through, but goodness, that connection, that trust, what does that do to that in the long term?
Mm-hmm.
That's sobering.
Exactly. And it's creating, associations, right? And memories. And so we want our children to think of us as that rock, that person that's just their solid foundation that they can go to. And we want to be there for them. But yeah, if there's too many situations where they just feel like I can't trust my mom or dad, or I don't like the way they're going to handle this, then they're going to just not tell us things, and they're going to get, more sneaky about things.
Sharon, we recently had in the news the very unfortunate news of the attack in Paris,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
the terrorist attack in Paris. And I was talking to you about this before we got onto the call.
Mm-hmm.
At my son's school, they've actually talked to the kids about this. I'm not sure in what capacity exactly, but my son knows about the attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in our house, we still have young kids, so we don't ever turn on the local news.
Mm-hmm.
The local news is always about who got killed, whose house got invaded,
Exactly.
this, that, and the other, who died.
Mm-hmm.
It's just completely
Not
morbid.
possible.
So we don't,
No.
we don't let our kids see that stuff.
Yeah.
And yet our kids get exposed to that in school, either from friends or from teachers or whatever. So we can't shield them, even at their young age, from some of these very harsh realities of life.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon, how do we as parents help our kids make sense of something as senseless as these terrorist attacks?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, it's been so awful and so sad. And there are a lot of disturbing images on the media. And I absolutely agree with you about not having your news channel on during the hours that your kids are awake, because you can't censor it. You don't know what they're about to show. And children really do need to hear that information from us. And then that way we can censor it. So I would ask your child, say, there's been this very sad event that's happened in France, and I know at school they've talked to you about it. Can you tell me what you've heard? And so that's the starting point, is you want to get an idea as to what your child has taken in and where they're at with their understanding. And then from getting them to start by sharing what they know, you'll also be able to figure out the pieces where they might be confused. And also you're creating that opportunity to have an open and heart-to-heart conversation where they can ask you questions to help them process it. And really, you want to limit the amount of information you're giving according to the age of your child. So you always want to be truthful, but you want to give the least amount of details that you need to, and yet you still want to answer their questions. And then we need to point out that, these kinds of attacks are rare. And I mean, I know in our lifetime, unfortunately, we are hearing about them more, but still the chances of it actually happening in your hometown are rare. And so you can say that to your child. And then you explain how, your mom and dad love you and we are in this very safe and loving home. And that's what matters. And then there might be ways, to reach out to victims of whatever it might be. The Nepal earthquake was another example where there's a lot of images on the TVs as well. And so there might be ways to try to reach out and do something to help these families that have been traumatized, or might be something within the local community where you just keep doing some kind of volunteer work, or Christmas time's a great time to put a hamper together or something like that. And just talk about how, unfortunately, there are some very angry people in the world who are very destructive. And, but our family is very loving and wants to help. And so we're going to keep putting more of that energy into the world.
I'm really glad that you shared that, Sharon, because I honestly did not know how to handle that with my kids. It's not the first incident. Mm-hmm. I live here in the United States, and every year the 9/11 attacks are, remembered. Mm-hmm. And at my kids' school, they actually go through a whole ceremony and everything. Okay. And I feel like a lot of times parents, maybe because we don't know how to talk about it, we just prefer to not talk about some of these difficult topics. Mm-hmm. But I like being able to point out to my kids that, okay, this is something that was very sad and very unfortunate. It rarely happens. Mm-hmm. We live in a safe place, so it probably isn't going to happen. There are other rare things, actually, like being hit by lightning, mm-hmm. that are so rare, they're not really scary to the kids anymore. Mm-hmm. So one might be able to use those sort of things as an analogy. But I especially like being proactive about doing something in the world, mm-hmm. whether it's reaching out to the victims directly or, as you pointed out, this is the holiday season that we're in. As at the time that we're recording this, you could actually go out and help people immediately in your community because that's the kind of family we are. Speaking of emotional resilience, mm-hmm. goodness, how good is that? Where a kid can say, there are some things beyond my control that happen which are really bad. Mm-hmm. But for the things that I can control, I want to do good things. Exactly.
Yeah. And and it all starts at home, right? If we can put more love in the world and more peace in the world, then, that's the only way I can look at it, is just we need to be a stronger force than the other destructive forces.
Yeah. Folks, goodness, there's much more we need to discuss with Miss Sharon Selby. Unfortunately, we're running up on the end of our time. I'm hoping that she will come back and do another show with us because, gosh, this has helped me personally, and I'm hoping that it has helped you and your family as well. Sharon, where can folks go to get more information, more helpful advice for parenting and to help their kids?
Well, thank you, first of all, Balaji, for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure, and I would love to come back. I have a website, Sharon Selby, SELBY.com, and I do write a blog every week, and I also have some free resources on there as well. And for your listeners, I'm going to have a page which will be SharonSelby.com/gift. And that will give you access to a 2-part video course on developing emotionally resilient children. So anybody can sign up for that, and I'd love to connect with anybody through my website as well.
Awesome. I love it. SharonSelby.com. Check it out, guys. She even talks about the movie Up, which, if anybody knows me, you know I'm a huge Pixar and Disney fan. I'm mad we didn't get to talk about that today. So next time we have Sharon on, we're going to go deep into the movie Up. We're going to talk about discipline. We're going to talk about self-regulation and resilience. Gosh, a whole bunch of other good stuff. But for now, if you want more, you got to go check her out, SharonSelby.com. Sharon, thanks again so much.
You're so welcome. Thanks so much for having me on.
All right, folks, you've been listening to the Bravepreneur Parents Academy. Until tomorrow, same time, same place. It's up, and away.
Thanks for supporting my dad's show. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to iTunes. He said hot chocolate is for closers. If you don't subscribe, I don't get hot chocolate. I love hot chocolate.
Fear not. Although this chapter of Bravepreneur Parents Academy has come to its conclusion, we have many more adventures for you and your brave little heroes. Head over to bravequest.me for access to the Brave Quest Journal, an interactive activity playbook that rewards your little ones with points for accomplishing tasks that build character and unleash your child's inner superhero all before bedtime. We look forward to having you join us for more adventures next time on Bravepreneur Parents Academy.